plan. Joining us now, Rachel Cunliffe, the comment editor at City AM, and the writer Benedict Spence. Hello to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Rachel, to you first, if I may. What's Boris up to?
He's launching a leadership bid. We knew that. We knew that when he decided to resign after the infamous Chequers weekend. Although it has to be said, he didn't resign first. He had to wait for David Davis to resign before he decided that, yes, he was going to do it. Boris's leadership ambitions are absolutely no secret. We also had all of the news on Friday and over the weekend about issues in his personal life. He's trying to deflect. He's trying to whip up sentiment against the Prime Minister, and he is trying to put himself in a position where he can say that he is the one to bring it all together. Unfortunately, he's done that by being about as divisive as he possibly can. So if we're looking for a figure to unite the Conservative Party, let alone the country, it's not Boris.
Benedict, I mean, he's dead catting, most certainly, but, you know, it's pretty effective strategy, isn't it?
Is it?
Sorry, can
Hold on a second. Come back to you in a second, Rachel, if I may. Benedict, I was saying that his strategy is dead catting, but certainly it seems pretty effective at this stage.
Yes, certainly I agree it's pretty effective. It's keeping him in the headlines. I don't really see that this can go wrong for him. I mean, it is, if you'll pardon the pun, inflammatory language, but anybody who agrees with him over Brexit isn't going to be put off by this. A few people are going to be offended by the use of language, but to be honest, they're not going to be any more offended than if he'd use any other sort of metaphor. Somebody will always find something to be offended by Boris Johnson. What I find very curious is, as Rachel said, he's clearly making a bid for the leadership, having previously been, if anything, slightly overcautious. I find it interesting that he uses such bombastic language, such sort of definitive language, having previously dithered over his attempt to become leader in the aftermath of the referendum, having, as Rachel said, only resigned after David Davis had jumped first. It's an interesting strategy that he seems to be going, at least verbally, all out, when in reality I think he's actually a lot more cautious than he lets on.
Rachel, we keep being told there's no vacancy, there's no vacancy, there's no vacancy. But even if there was, would there be one Boris-shaped? Because we saw the latest opinion poll in the Independent newspaper that suggested that a majority of Brits would not vote for Boris if they could vote for Theresa May.
No, and for all that the Conservative Party really doesn't like Theresa May, she's in power at the moment because they can't decide who they would like more. And I think anyone who wants to unite the Conservative Party at this point needs to draw support across the aisle, needs to try and unite the country, and needs to have at the heart of their agenda the idea that they're the candidate who's going to put everything that has happened in the Conservative Party beforehand behind them and move forward. Boris is about as close to the centre of all of the scandal and the infighting that's been in the Conservative Party for decades as it's possible to be. So I don't think that he is that candidate. And in terms of what Benedict was saying about, it's an interesting strategy because he was cautious and now he isn't. I don't think it's a strategy. I think the phrase all talk and no trousers really applies to Boris Johnson. He's very, very capable of putting himself in the spotlight from the safety of behind a headline. But we saw when he was Foreign Secretary, he doesn't actually have the ability or even I think the desire to put in the hard work of governing. And people saw that. And I think now people are starting to see through him.
I wonder if he doesn't have the ability, Benedict, or whether he chooses to approach it in a Boris way.
Well, I think, for a start, I think the phrase all talk, no trousers is very good, if a dreadful mental image. But it's interesting that we talk about the future leader of the Conservative Party needing to be able to unite the party and then unite the country. I don't actually think the future leader of the Conservative Party needs to do that at all. I think the Conservative Party is facing an existential crisis. I think sooner or later it is going to split. And the way Boris Johnson is looking at this is he doesn't actually have to beat Theresa May or any of the other Conservative leaders, actually high flyers. He just needs to beat Jeremy Corbyn when inevitably there is a general election and that is the candidate that they come up against. I think he sees him as eminently beatable, and what he'll be hoping for is that he can be leader by the time this comes around.
Yeah, he has to be elected first though, Benedict.
You do have to be elected, but I don't think that Theresa May is going to last long after Brexit. I think that she is here up until that point and no further. OK,
but Rachel, even if it's not her, then do you think that Conservative MPs will vote for Boris?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the timing on that is really important. We keep talking about will it be Boris or Theresa May, but remember you need 48 Conservative MPs to trigger a leadership contest, and then Theresa May is going to fight it. And looking at the current numbers, she's going to win it, especially if the other candidate is Boris Johnson, because for all that he's whipping up support with his base and with Conservative voters, which he may be, and Conservative members, he has very little support and is quickly losing support among MPs. And in order to lead the Conservative Party, you need the support of MPs first. And the more that he tries to put himself in the headlines and be as inflammatory as possible to get that coverage, which he is very, very effective at doing, the more he alienates his parliamentary colleagues, and he needs them first. So it's a very risky strategy.
Yeah, but Benedict, I mean, he may break cover first, but it doesn't have to be a race between those two. I mean, Sajid Javid could throw his hat into the ring. The present Foreign Secretary could do the same thing.
True, but I don't actually think many members of the public have that much more faith in any other members of the cabinet than they do in Boris Johnson. I mean, Boris Johnson doesn't have a great deal of support, but actually, does Jeremy Hunt have any more?
Sorry,
well, it's not up to the public, but this is this is true.
It's not up to the public.
This is true, it's not up to the public, but the Conservative Party, if they are then going to fight a general election, need to look beyond what their own members want. They do need to look at who polls the best amongst the members of the public, otherwise they won't win a general election.
So are we accepting then, Rachel, that it does come down to personality politics?
I think that's the way that it's looking at the moment. But you talked about getting rid of Theresa May after Brexit. So we're talking about March or April at the very earliest. The next election isn't going to be until 2021 under the current schedule. A lot can change in that time. We might have got sick of personality politics, or a new personality may have risen to the top that we haven't even heard about now, that we're not currently talking about, because we all know stuff changes in politics very, very quickly. And Boris Johnson is very much the old guard of that. So I think the way that the political landscape is looking now doesn't tell you very much about who the contenders for the future of the leadership might actually be.
Benedict, final thought from you?
My final thought is that possibly I haven't mentioned this yet, but it's entirely possible that Boris Johnson is entirely banking on Theresa May lasting a little bit longer, but then her version of Brexit and the Chequers deal either being disastrous or not passing, in which case it really doesn't matter what his opinion is, because we'll never get to enact it, but he will still get to stand from the sidelines and say, I told you this is what you should have done.
Good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you. What about you? What do you think? Very keen to hear your views on that, or indeed any of the stories that we're covering here on Sky News this afternoon. Future leader of the Conservative Party, future Prime Minister in the shape of